Cole Matthews moved to Maple Hollow with his loyal German Shepherd Ranger, determined to rebuild his life after a painful divorce. The old house beneath the giant oak tree seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. But on his very first night, Ranger began digging and howling, clawing at the frozen ground until a hidden tunnel opened beneath the roots. Inside lay photographs of missing children, coils of rope, and packages of white powder, chilling evidence of a nightmare buried for 15 years. Who had built this underground maze, and why were children being forced to deliver drugs while the town slept? What happens next will break your heart and then make you believe in miracles again. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The wind that rolled through Maple Hollow that morning carried with it a dry, bitter cold. It scoured the pavement, whispered through frozen pine needles, and tugged at the eaves of old homes that stood stoic in the frostbitten silence. The town was a hush of snowbanks and skeletal trees, wrapped in winter's tight grip. At the edge of town, beneath a towering and gnarled oak tree, a battered blue Ford Explorer rumbled into the driveway of an aging Victorian home with flaking paint and shuttered windows. Cole Matthews stepped out into the snow, boot soles crunching against the hardened ground. At 32, he looked both older and younger than his age. Lines of wear etched lightly at the corners of his storm-gray eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen too much but still expected better. His build was lean but strong, the result of years of fieldwork and discipline rather than vanity. He wore a heavy canvas coat, police issue, though his badge was now packed somewhere between boxes of winter gear and unopened regrets. His jaw was shadowed with 3-day stubble, a compromise between self-care and exhaustion. At his side trotted Ranger, a 5-year-old German Shepherd, black and tan with alert amber eyes and a posture that radiated trained vigilance. A small scar above his front left leg, from a blade during a warehouse takedown 2 years ago, reminded anyone who asked that Ranger had earned his retirement. But he hadn't slowed. He watched his surroundings like a soldier returning to familiar war zones, even if they were dressed in snow. Cole paused at the base of the porch stairs and glanced up at the house. His house now. 2 stories, steep roof, a little crooked at the corners. The kind of home that would have suited a family. He swallowed the thought and gave a soft whistle to Ranger, who had stopped to sniff at the tree trunk. "Come on, boy. Let's see what we've signed up for." The door creaked on its hinges as he stepped inside. The air smelled of old wood and mothballs. There were dust motes in the light that filtered through faded curtains, and somewhere in the walls pipes thumped like a distant heartbeat. But it was solid. Empty, but solid. It was the kind of house you could fix, the kind of house where a man could rebuild something. At least, that was what he told himself when he signed the papers. The previous owner, according to the realtor, had left suddenly. No family, no debts, just disappeared. Cole hadn't thought much of it. Property like this, at the price he got it for, came with loose ends. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. Cole looked up to see a short, thin woman bundled in layers of wool. She wore an oversized green coat, mittens with holes in them, and a knit cap pulled low over a crown of gray hair. She crossed the narrow street slowly, careful of the ice, and stopped just beyond the gate. "You must be the new officer," she said, smiling warmly despite the cold. "I am. Cole Matthews." He stepped forward, offering a gloved hand. "Mildred Hannigan, retired schoolteacher. That's my place across the way," she pointed with a crooked finger. "Lived here all my life. That house of yours has been empty 3 winters now." "Yeah, I got it for a steal. Figured it just needed a little love." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. "That house was owned by a man named Victor Hale. Quiet fella. No one really knew him. Then one day, he just stopped showing up. Folks figured he skipped town, but..." She lowered her voice. "I always thought it was strange how the power bills kept coming, and how no one ever found his truck." Cole raised an eyebrow. "That in the police report?" "No report," she said with a thin smile. "Just town gossip. but gossip keeps people safe sometimes. He nodded politely, sensing that Mrs. Hannigan was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything but offered warnings in riddles. "Thanks for the heads up." Her gaze shifted to Ranger, who was standing like a statue near the front steps. "Beautiful dog. K9? Retired. Boston unit." Cole reached down to scratch behind Ranger's ear. "Still sharper than most officers I've worked with." Mrs. Hannigan smiled again, but this time it didn't quite reach her eyes. "He'll do you more good than most folks around here." And with that cryptic note, she turned and headed back across the road, disappearing into her house like a shadow at sunset. Cole spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking. Boxes of memories, a dented kettle, a framed photo he wasn't sure why he still kept. Divorce had left him with more emotional clutter than material. At least here, in this strange town with a quiet history, there were no expectations. No ex-wife, no captain breathing down his neck. Just him and Ranger and a blank slate. The next morning, the sun rose cold and bright. Thin frost glazed the windows. Ranger was already standing at the back door, tail flicking slightly, ears high. "Want to check out the yard?" Cole muttered, pulling on his coat. They stepped into the snow-crusted backyard. The oak tree, massive and twisted, towered above them like something out of a Gothic novel. Its roots broke through the ground in places, old and scarred. Cole reached for a shovel he had leaned near the fence. He planned to dig a few holes for spring planting. Herbs, maybe tomatoes if he stuck around long enough. But before he could start, Ranger froze. The dog's body stiffened, nose low to the ground. Then a low, sharp bark tore from his throat. Alert, urgent. "What is it, boy?" Ranger stepped toward the base of the oak, circling once, then twice. His claws scraped at the frozen earth, and then he began digging furiously, sending up clouds of powdery snow and dry dirt. Cole dropped the shovel. "Ranger! Hey, stop that!" But the dog wouldn't stop. His growl deepened. He dug with purpose, like something ancient and buried was calling him. Cole knelt beside him and pushed snow aside with his hands. Beneath the surface, tangled in roots and half-frozen mud, were planks of wood, rotting, stained, and very much out of place in an old backyard. His breath caught. This wasn't tree roots or storm debris. This was something buried, and Ranger had just found it. The wood groaned under Cole's boots as he stepped down into the earth. Ranger followed silently behind, his claws clicking against the rotting planks that formed the stairwell. The flashlight in Cole's hand barely pierced the gloom, its narrow beam swallowed by the damp, claustrophobic dark of the hidden tunnel. The air was cool and stale, laced with something acrid mold, dust, and the faint chemical sting of decay. Cole's breath plumed in front of him like fog. The tunnel was narrower than he expected, no more than 5 feet across, and constructed with rough timber supports and packed dirt walls. It ran straight for at least 15 feet before curving sharply to the right. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. Ranger sniffed along the baseboards, his body taut and alert, tail held rigid behind him. At the curve, Cole swept the light across the walls and froze. Photographs. Dozens of them, clipped onto wires, nailed into the beams, and pinned directly to the earthen walls. The images were all of children, some blurry, some shockingly clear. Each child was alone, most appearing between 10 and 14 years old. Several wore what looked like courier uniforms, windbreakers with reflective strips, faded ball caps, canvas bags slung over one shoulder. None of them smiled. Cole's stomach turned. He stepped closer, examining one photo. A boy, maybe 11, was standing on a porch holding a box with a shipping label blurred by motion. His face was tired, frightened. In another, a girl in pigtails sat on the edge of a van's bumper, a bruise visible on her forearm. Many of the photos had numbers scrawled on the back in blue pen. Codes, maybe, or delivery routes. Ranger let out a low growl and patted ahead. Cole followed him through a low doorway braced with cracked beams. On the other side was a small chamber, maybe 10 by 10 feet, with crates stacked in the corner and a makeshift desk fashioned from 2 cinder blocks and a plank of wood. The flashlight beam swept across the desk and something glinted. Cole knelt and picked up a clear plastic bag. Inside was a fine white powder, sealed, labeled, and weighed. He opened a crate. Dozens more. Heroin, cocaine, possibly fentanyl. He didn't need to test it to know it was illegal and highly organized. "Jesus," he whispered. Taped to the wall behind the desk was a map of Maple Hollow. It was crude, hand-drawn, with delivery routes traced in black ink. Some streets were marked with stars. Others were crossed out. Below the map, resting on the desk, was a torn yellow notepad. The scrawled handwriting was erratic, messy, the way a kid might write. Cole scanned a few lines. Tuesday, 114 Kingman. Drop small. Remember, no questions. Don't let the man in the red hat see you. Use back door, no lights. He turned the page and found a list of addresses. All local, all handwritten. In some places, the writing changed slightly. Different pressure, different slant. More than one hand had written these notes. Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent. Cole spun, flashlight cutting through the dark. The dog was standing at the far corner of the room, paws pressed against the dirt wall. He began pawing at the base, growling. Cole joined him and examined the ground, and saw something unusual, a square outline of wood slightly raised from the surrounding dirt. A hatch. Cole dug with his hands, scooping dirt aside until he could wedge his fingers under the edge and pull. The wooden slab creaked loudly as he lifted it, revealing a narrow tunnel angling downward and away from the house. The smell that drifted up was colder, damper, more like a basement or storage cellar. Ranger didn't hesitate. He trotted into the passage and vanished around a bend. "Hey!" Cole hissed, crawling in after him. The tunnel dropped for a few yards before flattening out. They emerged into a wider corridor that appeared more permanent, lined with bricks in places and shored up with steel supports. A few battery-powered lanterns sat abandoned on shelves. Cole flipped one on, still working. In the dim glow, he saw something that stopped him cold. At the far end of the tunnel was an exit, or rather, a heavy steel door, propped open. Beyond it lay a cement floor, cracked and covered in leaves. They were in an old delivery warehouse. Cole recognized it now, the back lot behind the long-abandoned Maple Hollow Freight Depot, which the town had voted to tear down 5 years ago. The vote never passed. Budget issues. It had been forgotten since. No patrols, no lights, just boarded windows and weeds. So this was the end of the route. Ranger prowled the warehouse floor, nose low. Cole followed and found a faded tarp over a pile of boxes. Peeling it back revealed empty bags, kid-sized canvas jackets, and small plastic vials. One jacket had a name tag sewn into the collar. Elijah, size 12. Cole's pulse thundered in his ears. He snapped photos of everything. The photos, the map, the packages, the notes. When he looked up, Ranger was standing by a back corner, his body frozen, tail stiff. Cole walked over. There, scratched into the wall, were 4 vertical lines and a diagonal slash. A prisoner's tally mark. Someone had lived down here, and judging by the fresh scuff marks in the dust, someone might still be using it. The morning sun did little to warm Maple Hollow as Cole Matthews pulled into the police department's narrow parking lot. Frost still clung to the edges of the windshield, and the air smelled faintly of salt and old diesel. The station was a modest brick building with a crooked flagpole and windows that hadn't been washed in months. It was the kind of place where crime meant loud teenagers or the occasional stolen snowblower, not tunnels under trees and drug routes mapped in a child's handwriting. Cole stepped out, Ranger trotting closely behind. The German shepherd's breath steamed in the cold, his nose twitching as they entered through the back entrance. Inside, the department was quiet, only a few officers moving about, most in wool-lined flannel instead of full uniform. Cole nodded at a few faces but didn't stop for conversation. He wasn't ready to share what he'd found. Not yet. He needed facts first. He made his way down the hallway to the archive room. The door creaked as he opened it. A dim bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows over stacks of aging boxes and metal cabinets. The scent of paper and dust clung to the air. Cole took off his gloves and began flipping through the old records, pulling files labeled Missing Juveniles from the early 2000s. It didn't take long. Case number MH021408. Date November 18, 2008. Subjects: Carter Simmons, 12, Elijah Warren, 10, and Marissa Beck, 13. Status: open. Presumed runaway. No leads. Case closed due to lack of actionable evidence. Cole frowned. He flipped the pages. There were only 3. No follow-ups, no witness statements beyond a few lines from tired parents, no forensic testing. The file looked like it had been closed before anyone even tried. He scanned the photos. Elijah Warren. The name stitched into the collar of the jacket he found yesterday in the warehouse. Same face, though younger. Brown hair, wide eyes, the shy tilt of his mouth. Cole felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. Ranger sat nearby, ears twitching. Cole reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the latex glove he'd found in the tunnel, the one discarded near the tally marks in the wall. He opened a small evidence bag, sealed the glove inside, and labeled it. He wasn't forensics, but he'd worked narcotics long enough to follow the basics. It was worth testing. If DNA came back connected to Elijah or the other kids, it would prove they had been there, that they hadn't run away at all. Just as he was sealing the folder, the door opened behind him. A young woman stepped inside, holding a paper coffee cup in each hand. She was in her late 20s, with olive-toned skin, deep brown eyes, and a confident way of walking that suggested she'd been underestimated most of her life and learned to enjoy proving people wrong. She wore dark jeans, a leather jacket under her regulation coat, and her shoulder-length black hair was tied up in a loose bun. "Matthews?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "You don't look like someone who digs through cold cases for fun." He straightened. "And you are?" "Grace Moreno. I transferred in 3 weeks ago. Patrol, mostly, but I'm hoping to do more investigative work. I heard you asked for the juvenile files from 08. Cole gave a brief nod. "Yeah, I'm looking into something off the books for now." Grace held out one of the coffee cups. "Good. Then you'll need this. Black, no sugar. You look like that type." He accepted the cup with a quiet grunt of appreciation. "You always offer coffee to guys digging through old files?" "Only the ones who look like they didn't sleep last night," she replied, stepping further in. "So, what's the real story?" Cole hesitated. Then he gestured to the folder on the table. 3 missing kids. 15 years ago. Case closed almost immediately. "I found one of their names yesterday. Elijah Warren. Stitched inside a jacket in a warehouse connected to a tunnel I found on my property." Grace blinked, her casual expression fading. "A tunnel?" He gave her a quick summary. The digging, the hatch under the tree, the photographs, the plastic packages, the map, the list of addresses in childlike handwriting. She was quiet for a beat, absorbing the weight of it. Then, "You think they used the kids as couriers?" "I don't think," Cole said. "I'm nearly sure." "I also think they're still doing it." Grace lowered herself into the chair across from him. "You filed a report?" "Not yet. If I send this up the chain and it gets buried like the last one, someone might tip them off. If we're lucky, the kids are still local. Someone needs to act fast." She nodded slowly. "Let me help." Cole studied her face. She didn't look naive or overeager. There was something deliberate in her voice, a quiet determination. He didn't know her yet, but he recognized a fire in her that wasn't manufactured. She reminded him of himself years ago, before the wear of bureaucracy dulled his edges. "You have any experience with narcotics?" "Not officially," Grace said. "But I interned with a trafficking unit in El Paso during college. The use of minors in drug distribution isn't new, just hard to prove. Most departments don't want that kind of scandal attached to them." Cole exhaled through his nose. "That's what I'm afraid of." Ranger stood and walked over to the table, sniffing at the glove bag. Then, without prompting, He growled and pawed at the edge of the desk. Grace watched him with raised eyebrows. "He does that whenever something links to a scent he's tracking," Cole said. "Found the glove near the hatch." "I think it was dropped recently." Grace looked back at the photo of Elijah in the file. "If he's alive, I need to know," Cole said. "And I need someone who isn't afraid to pull at the wrong thread." She smiled, not out of amusement, but as if accepting a silent contract. "Then let's start pulling." The scent of disinfectant and cafeteria lasagna lingered in the air of the youth shelter in Ridgeport, a larger town 30 miles south of Maple Hollow. Cole Matthews stood quietly by the reception desk, hands in the pockets of his long winter coat, eyes scanning the hallway where faded murals and motivational posters lined the walls. The shelter was bright but hollow in a way that only temporary places could be, safe, functional, but heavy with stories no one wanted to tell. Next to him, Grace Moreno leaned casually against the wall, her coat unzipped, a clipboard in hand. She wore her hair loose that day, soft waves brushing her shoulders, but her posture remained alert. "You sure about this?" she asked under her breath. "DNA matched," Cole replied. Glove from the tunnel had sweat from one of the missing kids. The match pinged against Elijah Warren's juvenile file. That's how they found him and Liam. He glanced down the corridor. "They've been here 2 weeks." Ranger sat patiently at Cole's feet, his body relaxed but eyes sharp. The shepherd's ears flicked at every voice down the hallway. He wasn't just alert, he was attuned to something invisible in the air, something raw and cautious. Ranger could smell trauma long before humans could name it. A woman in scrubs approached, mid-30s with a badge clipped to her collar. Tracy Bloom, youth case manager. She was short, slightly plump, with gentle brown eyes and a fast, no-nonsense stride. "They're ready to speak with you," she said, voice hushed. "But be careful with your questions." "They've only just begun therapy, understood," Cole said. She led them into a side room that smelled faintly of crayons and lemon cleaner. There were couches, blankets, and a wall of books designed for comfort, but everyone knew it was still an interview room. 2 boys sat side by side. The one on the left had sandy brown hair and sat slouched with his hands between his knees, fingers picking at a loose thread on his jeans. He looked about 16, maybe 17, and had a jagged scar running from his right eyebrow to his temple. His name was Liam Warren. The boy beside him was shorter, darker-haired, wiry in build, maybe a year younger. His shoulders were stiff, like he was always ready to flinch. His name was Elijah Liam's younger brother, missing for nearly 9 years. Cole knelt in front of them, keeping his voice low. "I'm Officer Cole Matthews." "This is Officer Grace Moreno. We're not here to scare you or pressure you. We just want to understand." Liam's eyes flicked to Ranger and then back to Cole. "You're the one who found the jacket." "I am. Found it in a warehouse behind a tunnel on my property. I think you were there. That jacket had your name stitched in." Elijah looked down. Liam swallowed, jaw tightening. "We were there," he said. "A long time." Grace moved to the corner and sat, giving them space. She said nothing, just nodded encouragingly. "They took us," Liam continued, voice cracking slightly. "Told our parents we ran away. Said nobody was looking for us. We were just numbers to them after that. No names." "Who are they?" Cole asked gently. "Different men. Never the same face for too long. One guy taught us how to deliver packages, told us what doors to knock on. Sometimes we didn't even know what we were carrying." Elijah finally spoke, voice small. "They said if we didn't do it right, they'd hurt Liam." Cole's throat tightened. "They made you couriers." Liam nodded. "At first it was small stuff. Then it got heavier, new routes, bigger cities. When we got older, we became harder to hide. They dropped us off outside Ridgeport 3 weeks ago and vanished." "They never took you back to Maple Hollow?" Grace asked softly. "Once," Liam said. "A long time ago. There's a house with a tree huge. Oak, I think. We slept under it one night. I saw a man bury something under the roots. I thought he was going to bury us too." Cole's blood ran cold. "That house belongs to me now." Liam blinked. Then you're closer to them than you think. Ranger stood, slowly approached the boys and sat beside them, tail brushing lightly against Elijah's leg. The boy reached out tentatively, his hand trembling slightly, and touched Ranger's neck. "He's safe," Cole said. "Ranger's retired K9. He doesn't forget smells." "He remembered yours." Elijah didn't say anything but leaned a little closer into the dog. After the interview, Cole and Grace stepped into the hallway with Tracy Bloom. She folded her arms, watching the boys through the glass. "Liam's been protecting Elijah since the day they got here," she said. "He doesn't sleep unless he knows the door's locked." "Elijah has night terrors. We've only just started to make progress." "Have they been examined by trauma specialists?" Grace asked. "We're short-staffed, but yes. Physical abuse, psychological manipulation, and years of forced labor. These boys weren't just kidnapped, they were used." Cole clenched his jaw. "And no one noticed?" Tracy gave him a look that said, "You already know the answer to that." Driving back to Maple Hollow, the sky was heavy with snow clouds. Grace kept her hands on the wheel, eyes straight ahead. "What Liam said about the tree, that's your oak." Cole stared out the window, thinking of the tunnel, the hatch, the buried crates, the tally marks. They used my property like a pit stop, a training ground. Maybe Grace glanced over. That house was vacant for years. They might have assumed no one would ever find it. They were almost right. Ranger lay in the back seat, ears twitching at every bump in the road. He whined softly once, as if sharing in the burden. Back at Cole's house, the oak tree loomed as silent and imposing as ever. Snow was beginning to fall. Cole stood at the base of the tree, hand resting on Ranger's head. "Liam's still looking for someone," he said quietly. "His brother?" Grace asked. Cole shook his head. "Another brother. Younger. Said he was taken too, but disappeared into a different branch of the route. That's why Liam didn't run when he had the chance. He stayed to protect the others." Grace looked up at the house, then back at the tree. "We're just getting started." The snow in Maple Hollow had thickened by the hour, blanketing sidewalks and burying tire tracks before they could freeze over. It was just past 9 a.m. when Cole Matthews parked his cruiser outside Town Hall, steam curling from the hood. He sat for a moment in silence, Ranger in the back seat, panting lightly, watching Cole through the rearview mirror. Inside, the town records department was warm and dry, though it smelled faintly of mildew and toner. The receptionist, a thin woman in her 60s named Cynthia Hayward, with perfectly set silver hair and horn-rimmed glasses, barely looked up as Cole approached the counter. "Looking for property records," he said. "For 412 Greystone Lane." Cynthia peered at him over her glasses. "That's the old Hale property, isn't it? Thought that place finally sold after sitting empty for years. I bought it," Cole said simply. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she said nothing, just turned to a filing cabinet behind her and rifled through manila folders. "Victor Hale," she muttered. "Yes, here it is. Owner of record from 1993 until 2013. No forwarding address when he left. Just stopped paying the taxes. County foreclosed in 2015. She handed over the folder. Inside were tax statements, utilities, and a deed transfer form signed by Hale himself. No phone number, no next of kin. "Did anyone ever file a missing persons report on him?" Cole asked. Cynthia blinked. "Missing? Number? Most folks figured he ran off. Quiet man, always kept to himself. Some said he was odd, maybe even dangerous." Cole took the file and thanked her. On the way out, he turned to Ranger, who now sat upright, ears alert. "Let's go see what Mrs. Hannigan remembers." Across the street, the old woman was already sweeping her porch, bundled in a wool coat and floral scarf. Her hands trembled slightly, but her posture was straight. She looked up as Cole approached. "Officer Matthews," she greeted, nodding toward the snow. "Starting to feel like the whole town's trying to bury itself." "I was hoping to ask you something about Victor Hale," Cole said. Mrs. Hannigan's brow creased. "What about him? You mentioned he disappeared. Do you remember anything strange from back then?" She hesitated, then leaned on her broom. Strange was his default. Never spoke to anyone unless he had to. But I do remember one thing. About a month before he left, I saw a moving truck, black, unmarked, pull up next to the old warehouse near the train tracks. Late at night, maybe midnight, men unloaded crates, carried them around the back. I didn't see where they went. Did you call the police? I did. Her voice was thin now. They said they'd check it out. But I never saw a patrol car come, and a week later, the truck came again. This time, they were loading. Cole exchanged a glance with Ranger, who had sat down beside him, watching Mrs. Hannigan like she was testifying under oath. Could you show me exactly where? Half an hour later, Cole pulled the cruiser into the snow-covered lot behind the abandoned Maple Hollow storage and freight, a long-forgotten brick warehouse sagging at its foundation. Rusted padlocks hung from chained doors, and graffiti peeled from the west wall like sunburnt skin. Cole stepped out, Ranger bounding after him. Grace Moreno met them there, already walking the perimeter in her thick winter jacket and jeans, a camera hanging from her neck. "No tracks in or out since the storm," she said, brushing snow off her boots. "This place hasn't been touched recently." "Let's change that," Cole replied. They circled to a side entrance where a narrow metal door hung askew. Cole pushed it open. Inside, dust hung in the air like fine ash. Cold light filtered through grime-covered windows. Ranger growled softly and trotted forward, nose low. Cole followed, flashlight in hand. Grace trailed behind, checking corners. The warehouse floor was mostly empty. Remnants of wood pallets, an old dolly, and cardboard rotting in puddles. But in the far right corner, past a wall of stacked crates, Ranger stopped and began to paw at a locked metal door. Cole crouched beside him. "You smell something?" Ranger scratched once, then barked, short, sharp, alert. Grace stepped beside them. "Want me to pop it?" Cole nodded. Grace pulled a small lockpick set from her coat. "Hobby," she explained, kneeling. Within 30 seconds, the latch clicked open. The door creaked inward. What lay beyond was no longer just a dusty relic of industry. The room had been used. A cot sat against the wall. A camping lantern, cold now, rested on a plastic table beside a small electric hot plate. The air was faintly metallic and sharp, like antiseptic. More importantly, the walls were covered in maps, names, and photographs. Cole stepped closer. A map of Maple Hollow had red pushpins marking locations: schools, parks, convenience stores. Beside it, clipped to string lines like a grim gallery, were photos of children. Not the same ones as before. These were more recent. The dates scribbled in the corners were from this past year, some just weeks ago. Grace whispered, "These kids are still being watched." Ranger nosed toward a plastic storage bin in the corner. Cole opened it and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside, photocopies of driver's licenses, delivery schedules, handwritten notes. He flipped through one and stopped. A black and white picture of Victor Hale, taken from what looked like a traffic camera. Dated 3 weeks ago. Location, Maple Hollow Gas, and go. "He's back," Cole muttered. Grace leaned in. "That's less than a mile from your place." On the back of the photo, a single line was scribbled. "No contact until delivery site is confirmed." Cole looked up at the wall again. Beneath one map was a list of initials, some scratched out, others still visible. One caught his eye. "L.W.? Liam Warren," he said aloud. "They tracked him." Even after they let him go, Grace's expression hardened. "So, they're still running the operation." Just quieter, Cole glanced at Ranger, who stood now by another sealed door at the rear of the room, nose twitching. "What is it, boy?" He opened it to find a smaller, hidden storage space, and inside, shelves of recently packed packages wrapped in brown paper, each labeled with a street address and a name. One package sat on a table, unopened. Cole slid it carefully with his pocket knife. Inside, children's clothing. New. Tags still on, but beneath the clothing was a thick plastic bag filled with white powder. A delivery meant to move both at once. a clean shirt to disguise what was really being sent. Ranger whined softly, pawing the floor. Cole crouched beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "They've been here," he said quietly, "and they're planning more." The snow had not let up all day, turning Maple Hollow into a white labyrinth of buried cars and muffled footsteps. Street lamps buzzed dimly through the storm, and the air smelled of pine sap and smoke from wood stoves. Cole Matthews sat inside his dim living room, the curtains drawn tight, the glow of a single lamp reflecting off his badge on the coffee table. Grace Moreno was on the couch opposite him, her long hair pulled back, sleeves rolled to her elbows as she typed furiously on a laptop. Ranger lay on the rug between them, eyes open, muscles taut as though waiting for the next command. "We can't stake this place out 24/7, Grace said, finally closing the laptop. "They'll see us. If Hale or his people are still watching, we'll scare them off." Cole nodded, rubbing his chin. "Then we make them think we're gone." He leaned forward, voice low. "Tomorrow, we leave. Pack the cruiser, head down the main road, make it obvious. But before that," he pointed to the duffel bag by his feet, filled with motion-sensitive cameras, "we seed the property. Every angle of the oak, the back fence, the cellar door." Grace tilted her head. "And if they come while we're gone?" Cole's gaze shifted to Ranger. The dog lifted his head, ears flicking. "That's where he comes in." Ranger was 5 years old, but still carried the sharpness of a working K9. His black and tan coat gleamed even in dim light, and his amber eyes seemed to miss nothing. Cole had trained him in scent detection years before, and now he was adapting that training into something more primal. Ranger would stay silent in the dark near the tunnel's entrance, a living alarm bell. Grace crouched to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Think he'll hold still for hours?" Cole smirked faintly. "Ranger can stay statue still if he knows it matters." "He'll smell Hale before we hear him." The next morning, they put the plan into motion. Cole and Grace packed duffel bags into the cruiser, making sure the neighbors saw them. Mrs. Hannigan even waved from her porch, her broom resting against the rail. Cole gave her a polite nod, then drove off with Grace. They circled the town twice before doubling back quietly through the back roads and slipping into an abandoned ranger station half a mile from Cole's house. From there, they could monitor the cameras via Grace's laptop. By mid-afternoon, the snow had slowed. Grace poured coffee into 2 paper cups and handed one to Cole. She looked tired, though her brown eyes stayed sharp. "The boys gave me something," she said, flipping through her notes. Liam and Elijah wrote down locations they remembered. Drop-off points, holding houses. Most are old motels or storage lots, but one name came up twice, a barn on Miller Road. They think kids were kept there before deliveries. Cole sipped the bitter coffee. "We'll check it. But first, we need Hale to make a move." Night fell heavy and silent. Maple Hollow became a painting of white drifts and crooked fences. The cameras showed nothing but shifting snow and the occasional deer moving through the yard. Cole felt the hours grind by, the static hum of the heater the only sound in the ranger station. Grace sat with her boots on the desk, flipping through a folder of Hale's past sightings. Ranger dozed lightly, his nose twitching in sleep. Then, just after 1 a.m., the laptop chimed. Camera 3, the oak tree. A faint shift of shadow near the tunnel hatch. Cole leaned forward, his chest tightening. "Playback," he whispered. Grace rewound 10 seconds. The figure was tall, bundled in a heavy coat, hood up. He moved with familiarity, not hesitation. A gloved hand reached down and brushed snow from the planks that covered the hatch. "Not Hale," Grace murmured. "Too thin." Maybe one of his men. Cole grabbed his coat. "Either way, we're going." They killed the lights and moved quickly through the snow, boots crunching softly. Ranger padded ahead, silent but alert, his breath visible in the frigid air. As they neared the tree line behind Cole's property, Cole dropped into a crouch, signaling Ranger with a hand gesture. The dog slipped into the shadows near the hatch, vanishing like smoke. From the cover of a fallen log, Cole and Grace watched. The man knelt at the hatch, tugging at the boards, His breath fogged out beneath the hood. Then a faint creak split the air, the hidden door opening. Ranger's body stiffened. A low, rumbling growl rolled from his chest, too soft for the intruder to hear, but enough to alert Cole. Cole and Grace closed the distance in seconds. Cole slammed into the man's side, sending him sprawling into the snow. Grace's flashlight beam snapped on, catching a pale, gaunt face twisted in shock. He was in his late 30s with hollow cheeks, greasy hair escaping his hood, and eyes that darted like a cornered rat. His name would later be identified as Daryl Kemp, a local drifter with a record for petty theft and assault. He reeked of sweat and cigarettes, his hands trembling as Cole pinned him down. "Where's Hale?" Cole barked. Daryl spat snow, snarling. "I don't know him." Grace cuffed his wrists swiftly, pressing a knee to his back. "You just happened to be digging into his tunnel at 1 a.m? Ranger stood over the hatch, barking once. Sharp, commanding. Cole looked at him, then at the open planks. He wasn't here to hide. He was here to fetch something. Cole hauled Daryl up and shoved him against the oak. "Who sent you?" Silence. Just the sound of wind through the branches. Daryl's lips twisted into a smirk. "You're too late." "It's already moving." Grace tightened the cuffs. "We'll see about that." They dragged him toward the cruiser while Ranger sniffed furiously at the hatch, nose pressed into the wood. He barked twice and whined, pawing at the frozen ground. Cole bent low, sweeping his flashlight across the edges. Fresh boot prints led away from the hatch, back toward the woods. Not one intruder. 2. Cole felt the weight of it in his gut. Hale was still out there, maybe even closer than they thought. The cold seemed sharper underground, the kind that cut past layers of clothing and pressed itself against the bones. Cole Matthews adjusted the beam of his flashlight as he descended the familiar steps beneath the oak. Ranger padded close behind, his breath a faint mist, ears pricked, ready. Grace Moreno followed, her pistol drawn, her eyes reflecting the narrow glow of the light. The tunnel smelled of mildew and something metallic, as though the earth itself was bleeding. The plan was simple, but it demanded precision. Earlier that day, Cole and Grace had spent hours debriefing the rescued boys at the Ridgeport shelter. Liam had leaned forward, voice low but steady, as he described the farthest chamber of the tunnel. "It's not just a storage room," he'd whispered. "It's where they locked us when they didn't need us. No light, just ropes, water in a bucket." You could hear kids crying through the dirt walls. Elijah had nodded, his hands trembling on his lap, confirming every detail. Now, guided by their testimony, Cole and Grace moved toward the deepest section of the tunnel. Ranger paused at the junction where the main chamber split into 2 directions, nose twitching. He growled, low and dangerous. Cole stiffened. "They're here," he mouthed. From ahead, the echo of voices bounced faintly along the corridor, harsh, gravelly. Cole clicked off his flashlight, leaving only the weak glow of Grace's, then motioned her to press flat against the wall. They edged closer, slow and silent, until the words sharpened into clarity. "Clean it out now. We don't have time." The voice was sharp, commanding. Victor Hale. Cole had seen his photograph, but hearing his voice in the flesh sent a chill down his spine. Hale had a deep, steady tone, like someone used to being obeyed. 2 other voices murmured assent. The sound of crates shifting followed. Then a metallic scrape, a door bolt being drawn back. Grace leaned in close, whispering, "They're emptying the chamber." Cole nodded, checking his sidearm. His heart hammered against his ribs, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. They had one chance to stop Hale before he erased the last proof of what had been done here. He raised his hand, a silent signal. Ranger slipped forward like a shadow, belly low, eyes gleaming. Cole and Grace followed. As they rounded the bend, the flashlight's cone caught them in stark relief. Victor Hale, tall and broad-shouldered despite his age. His face was angular, with a gauntness that made his skin cling to the bones. His gray hair was combed back with almost obsessive neatness, but his eyes were the most striking, pale, almost colorless, and devoid of hesitation. Beside him were 2 men in dark coats. One was stocky, with a shaved head and crooked nose, his hands wrapped around a crowbar. The other was wiry, mid-30s, unshaven, his jacket bulging where a pistol was holstered. Hale's eyes widened only slightly as the light struck him. "Matthews," he said, calm, even cordial. "I wondered when you'd come." Cole leveled his gun. "Step away from the door, Hale." Now, the wiry man's hand darted toward his gun. Ranger exploded forward with a snarl, slamming into the man's chest before the weapon cleared the holster. The man went down hard, Ranger's teeth snapping inches from his throat. Cole advanced, kicking the pistol away. Grace fired a warning shot into the dirt near the stocky man's feet. "Crowbar down. Hands up." For the first time, Hale's expression cracked. He raised his hands slowly, palms outward, but his gaze never wavered from Cole. "You think this ends here? You think you can walk into my house of stone and walk out alive?" Cole ignored him, motioning Ranger back. The dog released the subdued man reluctantly, retreating to Cole's side with a low growl. Grace cuffed the wiry one, her movements swift and practiced. Cole stepped past Hale to the heavy door they'd been opening. The smell hit him first. Stale sweat, damp rope, and the faint, sour tang of fear. He yanked the bolt back fully and swung the door wide. Inside, huddled against the wall, were 3 children. 2 boys and a girl, their ages somewhere between 12 and 15. Their wrists were bound with nylon rope, their faces pale and gaunt. The girl's hair hung in greasy tangles across her cheeks, and her eyes flinched from the light. One boy clutched his knees to his chest, rocking slightly. The youngest stared blankly at the floor, lips moving without sound. Cole's heart clenched. He holstered his gun and knelt, speaking gently. "It's okay. You're safe now. We're here to get you out." Ranger stepped into the doorway and sat down, lowering his head. His presence was steady, calm. The children's wide eyes locked onto him, and something shifted in their expressions. The girl reached out first, trembling fingers brushing Ranger's fur. The dog leaned closer, pressing against her hand. The rocking boy stopped, eyes widening as though recognizing safety for the first time. Cole cut their bindings quickly. Grace offered them water from a flask, her voice soothing. "You're brave." "We're taking you somewhere safe. Behind them." Hale spoke again, his tone mocking but strangely subdued. "You think saving 3 will matter when hundreds have already served their purpose?" Cole turned on him, anger rising like fire. "They're not couriers. They're kids, and this is where it ends." He shoved Hale against the wall, cuffing him as Grace secured the second man. Ranger stood guard, still bristling, every muscle taut. As the children were led out, stumbling but free, Cole allowed himself one long exhale. The weight of the underground pressed on him, but for the first time since stepping into Maple Hollow, he felt that some part of the nightmare was breaking open to light. The snow in Maple Hollow finally eased the following morning, leaving the town wrapped in white silence as though the night's terror had been swallowed by the earth itself. Cole Matthews stood on the steps of the police station, the dawn light washing over his weary face. His winter jacket hung open, his badge dull beneath the gray sky. Beside him, Ranger sat proudly, chest out, his fur catching the sun like burnished bronze. The dog's eyes were tired but alert, as though he knew their fight had only changed shape, not ended. Victor Hale and his 2 men had been processed before dawn. Shackled, silent, their names entered into files that would carry weight in court. Hale had not spoken a word since his arrest, only casting that same pale stare at Cole as though trying to brand him with a final curse. But silence was no shield now. The evidence from the tunnels, the maps, the photographs, and the testimony of the rescued children left no doubt. His empire had fallen in the very soil where he once buried his secrets. Grace Moreno leaned against the cruiser, arms folded, her breath fogging in the crisp air. Her dark eyes reflected exhaustion, but also triumph. She wore her hair loose that morning, the wind tugging strands across her face. "We did it," she said softly, almost to herself. Cole gave her a faint smile, then glanced at Ranger, whose tail swept once against the concrete as if to agree. The 3 teenagers rescued from the chamber were recovering at a nearby care facility. Dr. Meredith Allen, a child psychologist in her 50s with gentle eyes behind rimmed glasses, had taken personal responsibility. She was tall and slightly stooped, her silver-streaked hair tied in a low bun, and she had a way of speaking that felt like a lullaby. She reminded the children that they were safe, using soft tones and patient silence when words would overwhelm. "It will be slow," she told Cole during one of their visits, "but healing comes. Especially when they see someone who stood for them, Liam Warren, who had been free longer but carried his scars like shadows, visited often. The moment he was led into the same room as the smallest boy from the rescue, his younger brother Nathan, he froze, then ran forward, clutching him in a trembling embrace. Tears streaked both their faces, and for the first time in years, Liam's voice cracked with something like hope. Cole stood back, throat tight, while Ranger nudged the boys gently, pressing his warm body against them like a silent promise that no one would tear them apart again. News traveled quickly through Maple Hollow. Within days, the mayor announced a public gathering in the town square. Banners stretched across the streets, reading, "Thank you, heroes." Old buildings were draped in lights, their glow bouncing off the snow. Citizens gathered with candles and flags, their breath rising in small clouds as they clapped and cheered. For a town so long marked by whispers of fear, the sound was cleansing. On stage, the mayor, a short, stocky man named Robert Ellis with a booming voice and a fondness for checkered scarves, called Cole, Grace, and Mrs. Mildred forward. Mildred, wrapped in her heavy wool shawl, looked humbled but proud, her eyes misty as she waved shakily at the crowd. Grace stood tall, camera slung around her shoulder, though she wasn't working. Her smile was rare but genuine, and Cole, uncomfortable in the spotlight, rested a hand on Ranger's head as if sharing the moment. "Tonight," the mayor announced, his voice ringing out, "we honor those who brought light back to Maple Hollow. Officer Cole Matthews, Detective Grace Moreno, Mrs. Mildred Hanover, and Ranger, the bravest K-9 this town has ever known." Applause thundered. Ranger barked once, sharp and clear, and laughter rippled through the crowd. The mayor stepped forward with a small velvet box. Inside gleamed a silver medallion stamped with a shield and the words, "Valor K-9." He bent down, clipping it gently to Ranger's collar. The dog blinked, then wagged his tail, leaning into Cole's side as the crowd roared. But the celebration was not just for appearances. Slowly, the lives of the children began to mend. The care center introduced a therapy program with Ranger at its heart. The German Shepherd, once trained for tracking and defense, now learned the gentle work of comfort. He sat calmly as the children stroked his fur, listened patiently as they whispered broken pieces of memory, and rested his head in their laps when nightmares struck. His presence anchored them, reminding them that safety was real, not just a fragile dream. Cole visited often, not only as a police officer but as someone who understood loss and rebuilding. His divorce had once hollowed him out, made him believe life's second chances were myths. But watching these children laugh again, seeing Liam hold Nathan's hand with unshakable devotion gave him a new understanding. Justice was more than catching criminals. It was stitching broken lives back together. One quiet evening, Cole walked Ranger along the snowy ridge outside town. Grace joined him, her boots crunching in rhythm with his. "Funny," she said, her breath visible in the cold. "You came here looking for a new start. And somehow the town needed you for one too." Cole looked down at Ranger, who trotted between them, his metal glinting faintly in the moonlight. "Maybe that's what Maple Hollow is about," he said. "Second chances." Even in the darkest places, Grace smiled, slipping her hands into her coat pockets. "Then let's make sure it sticks." As the snow fell gently, blanketing the scars of the past, Maple Hollow breathed easier. Darkness had once filled its hidden chambers, but now light spilled back into its streets, carried not by banners or ceremonies, but by the quiet resilience of those who chose to believe again. A town, a few children, and one loyal dog named Ranger. In the end, the story of Cole, Ranger, and the children of Maple Hollow reminds us that even in the deepest tunnels of darkness, light can break through. What seemed impossible became possible because love, courage, and faith walked together. Some might call it chance, but I believe it was nothing short of a miracle. God works in quiet ways, through ordinary people and loyal companions, to bring healing where there has been hurt. Just like Cole found a new beginning and the children found hope again, we too can trust that no matter what struggles we face, there is a path forward when we hold on to faith. So let this be more than just a story. Let it be a reminder in our everyday lives to look for the small miracles around us. A kind word, a helping hand, the loyalty of a friend, or even in Neichin, the ocean bark of a faithful dog. If you believe in second chances and the power of God's protection, share this story with someone who needs encouragement. Comment Amen below to join others in prayer, and may God bless every one of you watching. And if you want more stories of faith, love, and miracles, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us.